How would we define the era that we're currently in? I think it's a really good question. And in some ways, I would say that this era has no definition, and that's possibly what's so interesting about it. You know, we're sitting here today, whatever date this is, Wednesday, the 1st of December, and what's very much in my mind is the death of Virgil Abloh. And it's a really important moment because I think Virgil represented a new figure in the creative industries, somebody who was genuinely a shapeshifter. So if I bring that back to try and think about how I would describe the era that we're in, I would say we're in a time of incredible shapeshifting. And this is happening ecologically, it's happening politically, it's happening culturally, socially. There's a kind of fluidity about all the old certainties. And I think Africans, we're really good at shapeshifting. You know, the Zulu word for an architect is a magician of space, but it also means the maker of a situation and the maker of a sensation. So when you combine those three things, somebody who's able to shapeshift, someone who can change the atmosphere or the dynamics of a space in order to alter a situation, but also produce a sensation. For me, that's an incredibly rich way to think about what architects. I mean, I can really only speak with authority from the position of an educator, and it's taken me some time to realize that actually education is my practice as an architect. It's certainly not the building of buildings. And in some ways it is about the building of knowledge, but even building knowledge, I think, is it's a process rather than a product. So I would say, you know, I feel very intensely engaged in the process of building knowledge. There are so many urgencies. 25 years ago, I think I started thinking about the question of identity in architecture. And 25 years ago, that was a really marginal issue. You know, issues of sustainability, technology, history and theory, those were the kind of big issues. I think we've come almost full circle. I think that the question of who we are, what sort of stories we want to tell about ourselves and about our relationship with other parts of the world, I would say is the most urgent issue now. There's an old saying, and I mean, this is probably the same in many cultures, that if you don't know where you've come from, you cannot know where you're going. I think particularly around the idea of blackness in architecture. When I use the term blackness, I mean Africa, I mean the diaspora, I mean issues of migration. It's certainly not you know, restricted to the continent. But I think the issue of blackness in architecture is really about knowing who we are. And it's not about knowing who we are in a static, traditional, forever grounded sense. It's about having enough confidence in who we are to be able to experiment, to be able to project, to propose. I think often on this continent particularly, we confuse the idea of culture with the idea of tradition. And for me, culture is a really dynamic force. It allows you to move. Tradition, by its very nature, I think, is the opposite. Tradition is about where one has come from. And yes, you need a certain amount of an understanding of one's traditions in order to be able to project where you might go. But I think thinking only about tradition is what holds us back. So I'd stick my neck out and say that I think that identity is the most urgent issue. And I see it particularly in the work of students, you know, and this is not just African students or black students. I see this kind of everywhere. Students come to the discipline from positions of otherness, and by that I mean they come to the discipline of architecture with histories, experiences, precedents that are not to be found in the Western canon. And no matter whether you come from Southeast Asia, you come from China, you come from Singapore, you come from Swaziland, the same question of how do I translate who I am into this material seems to be paramount. And you know, for all of our expertise, we're not very good at showing how to do that. The way we talk about identity is often incredibly reductive, and it's often, I'm going to be slaughtered for saying this, but it's often more a reflection of the inability of those in positions of authority in architectural education, their inability to translate and anticipate those questions. So there's a certain amount of humility that I think that the discipline or the profession certainly needs to swallow in order to position ourselves not as experts or as people who are the custodians of knowledge, but rather to see ourselves as the catalysts for inquiry And that can be a terrifying prospect. I mean, that moment where you start with a student and you have no idea where the conversation or the work is going to go. For me, I see those as the most exhilarating, the most important moments in pedagogy. But actually, much of our pedagogical tradition is about denying that. It's about saying, this is the outcome. I mean, one of the things I hate most, I absolutely loathe the idea of a learning outcome, because it presupposes that you know what's going to happen before you've even started the inquiry. So I think for me, humility is a really key quality. Humility and generosity, I think, and we don't often talk about those as qualities certainly in the profession, but I think those are incredibly necessary starting points for us to figure out where we go next.